And this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up in the next hour, GDPR goes into effect, changing forever how tech companies handle personal data. How will it affect you, and what's the likelihood it will be implemented in the United States? Plus, Zuckerberg faces the wrath of European Parliament and leaves a lot of questions unanswered, and lawmakers frustrated. We will bring you the highlights. And tech leaders descend on Paris to attend French President Macron's tech summit. We will hear from some of the top names in European tech ahead. Now to our top story. Friday, Europe's new data privacy laws officially went into effect. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, brings in unprecedented fines for companies that fail to adequately protect the data of EU citizens. We're talking 4% of an offending entity's total global revenue, or $24 million, whichever is higher. So just how will these new laws affect consumers around the world? Bloomberg's Quick Take has the answers.
You may have seen a few of these pop up on your phone or in your email. Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Square, GoDaddy, Tesco, Sainsbury's, H&M, and many more are updating their policies to give consumers more control over their personal data. Those updates and changes are thanks to a new law governing data privacy called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. The catch is, GDPR only applies to people who live in the European Union. But its adoption is largely expected to have Americans asking, why don't we have that? Here's how data collection currently works. When you sign up for, let's say, Facebook, you have to click a box agreeing to the company's terms. Those terms give Facebook the right to track your online activities, even if you're not actively browsing Facebook. Facebook can let third parties access it in order to sell ads and services.
Consumers will have the right to ask for copies of anything as basic as messages sent to them or by them.
That's Bloomberg tech editor Nate Langston.
Up to entire archives of all the content they've generated on a service.
On May 25th, companies with more than 250 employees and that hold data on European citizens will have to get unambiguous consent from users to collect their data, instead of just burying that okay inside fine print. It will also make it much easier to revoke consent users had previously given. For consumers that do opt in, they have a right to know what's being done with their data, and instead of being charged to obtain it, can request a free copy.
For companies like Google and Facebook, they've been making data available for download and deletion upon request for quite some time.
Consumers also have the right to be forgotten, which lets citizens request that organizations delete their data. Data portability. That gives consumers the right to retrieve their data and sell it to other companies. So, for example, you may be able to trade something like a gift certificate from Zara in exchange for your shopping history from J.Crew. If a firm has a data breach, companies must notify the authorities within 72 hours, and any failure to comply with this new law will be costly. Penalty fines can be as high as 4% of a company's global annual revenue.
Europe expects companies to act within the spirit of the law and not just to try and follow it to the letter. This means there'll be disputes and legal precedents to be set over the coming years.
So while the US is still reeling over Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the EU is moving ahead with tough new rules. Many will ask if the US should be next.
To discuss this and much more involving the European Union, we spoke with EU Ambassador to the United States, David O'Sullivan, on Wednesday from Washington.
I think it was very good that he went. It was very good that he agreed to speak before the European Parliament. And it was good that he heard at first hand some of the strong feelings there are amongst European politicians about these issues around privacy and around use of data. The question of the format was something decided by the Parliament. I think it probably would have been impossible to answer all those questions in the time allotted. I think this is part of an ongoing dialogue. We're having other contacts with Facebook. I think they know that there are issues, and these are complicated issues. So I think this was a good first step in opening a dialogue, and I'm sure there will be more.
One of the questions was, convince me you're not a monopoly and why we shouldn't break up Facebook. And he talked about how Facebook faces stiff competition, and yet this is a company with 2 billion users that owns 3 of the other major social networks, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, and WhatsApp. What could the EU conceivably do to address the monopoly question? And
I think it's very important important to understand that EU anti-monopoly law is not run on a political basis. It's not run by the European Parliament or even by the member states. It's run by the European Commission on the basis of well-established rules about dominant position and so forth. So I think the issue of abuse of dominant position or monopoly inquiries under the antitrust laws are a matter for the European Commission to conduct in the usual way. So I don't think this is something which enters into the political domain.
And they've been quite aggressive when talking about companies like Google in particular. Do you think they could take a greater interest in Facebook?
I have no idea, because it depends on what the facts would say. I mean, anti-monopoly and antitrust legislation and action is based on objective facts. It's based on analysis. So I think this is not something that's just going to be driven by political concerns. And the cases you've referred to have been the result of long investigations and in a very transparent and open way. So I have great faith in the objectivity of our antitrust activities.
We're just days away from GDPR going into effect. How will we really know if Facebook is complying and other companies?
Well, the answer is that the rules are there. It would be eventually for people who feel that their data is not being properly protected to make a complaint, or for someone to introduce a complaint to one of the data protection authorities. Then there would have to be an examination. The company would be given the opportunity to respond. And, if I may say so, Emily, you talked about these fines. This would be a fine will be the instrument of last resort at the end of a process in which companies have been asked to explain whether they're compliant, whether they're not compliant, why they're not compliant. So I don't think there's any risk that companies are going to find themselves suddenly out of the blue subject to heavy fines without there being due process and the time given to respond to any concerns there may be.
So on this note, you've made the argument that companies could actually be more innovative as a result of GDPR, but there's also small businesses that have said they've been put out of business as a result of this. Does that concern you?
I'm not aware of anyone who's been put out of business. Let's be clear, the GDPR, which enters into force on Friday, is not substantially different from the privacy directive we've had in 1995. It does introduce some new procedures, and it does introduce the element of enforcement through fines. But we've had a 2-year period for people to get used to this and to prepare. So, frankly, I think there is perhaps a little too much hype about the possible impact of this. It's evolution rather than revolution, and I believe that most companies have been able to adapt and prepare for this in an orderly way.
Do you think the U.S. will or should enact similar legislation?
That's for the U.S. to decide. I note that nearly 120 countries around the world.
This week, Goldman Sachs held its annual TechNet conference in Hong Kong. Bloomberg's Stephen Engel spoke exclusively to some of the region's leading and emerging tech players, including Tujia's CFO Warren Wang. Tujia is known as China's Airbnb and is rapidly chasing the growing number of Chinese traveling to popular destinations in Southeast Asia, Japan, and South Korea outside its home market of China. We asked him about the difference between the two home-sharing companies.
Airbnb is a well-respected competitor in China as well, but we think we are the #1 player in this industry in China. That's one thing. And the other thing is we are not just a pure online company. We have offline operations as well. So we have a local team in most cities in China to help these local house owners to run their business. That's, I think, the big difference between us and Airbnb in China.
On Tuesday, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg testified before the European Parliament, and he left EU lawmakers fuming over unanswered questions at the end of a hearing that began with a mea culpa over the company's recent privacy mistakes. Zuckerberg repeated what he has been telling every audience recently, that his company didn't take a broad enough view of its responsibility over user data, fake news, and foreign interference in elections, and that he's sorry for it. He also spoke about regulation.
I think the internet is becoming increasingly important in people's lives. Some sort of regulation is important and inevitable, and the important thing is to get this right, and to make sure that we have regulatory frameworks that help protect people, that are flexible so that they allow for innovation, that don't inadvertently prevent new technologies like AI from being able to develop.
Meantime, Wednesday, Facebook launched an aggressive new campaign to tell the world how it is fighting fake news and how its 2 billion users can spot it. We were joined by Tessa Lyons, Facebook Newsfeed product manager from Stanford, California, to talk about what else Facebook is doing to fight fake news.
We've been working hard to stop the spread of false news. And given the scale, as you mentioned, we've been using both technology and human review. And I'd love to talk with you more about those actions. What we're sharing today are updates on our efforts to communicate more openly about our actions and to be held accountable for the progress that we're making. So specifically, we're sharing a short film that gives an inside look at the teams fighting false news on Facebook, the work that we do to disrupt financial incentives, to fight fake accounts, and to reduce the overall spread of this type of content. And we're also sharing that we're going to be working with academics in order to provide them with data to help all of us better understand and measure the volume and effects of misinformation and the impact of our efforts to fight it.
You're launching a new short film called Facing Facts, which profiles you and other people at Facebook who are working on this. This is in addition to a TV ad campaign, a print ad campaign. What about the people out there who say this is just PR spin?
Well, what I would say is that we're all deeply committed to fighting false news on Facebook. We recognize that there's a fake news problem, and we recognize that it's not what people want when they come to Facebook. So we're committed, based on the feedback from our community, to actually improve this problem. In order to be held accountable, we need to do more to help academics access the data so that we can all measure the current volume and effects of misinformation and the trends in those over time, so that we can prove that our efforts are actually having an effect and helping us to fight this problem and to contain the spread of false news on Facebook.
So we talk a lot about fake news, but this sort of fully bogus fake stuff isn't necessarily the biggest problem. Actually, a bigger concern might be sort of hyper-partisan news that presents facts in a sort of misleading way and with a political agenda. What are you doing about that?
You're absolutely right that when we say misinformation or fake news, we're all referring to a lot of different problems. And so it's important for us to break them down in order to fight them most effectively. We've actually seen that the majority of false news on Facebook is financially motivated. And so one of the main things that we're doing is working to disrupt those financial incentives. Now, that might look like truly fake facts, but that can also look like partisan or misleading content. By going after those financial incentives, we can reduce the spread of a broad swath of that content. But more broadly, we know there's also information that people are sharing that might not be financially motivated, but might be fake or misleading in other ways. And so one of the things that we're doing is working with fact checkers in order to provide people with more context about the stories that they're seeing, and in some cases to reduce the spread of those stories by showing them lower in people's newsfeed.
So fact checkers are one thing. Others have suggested, why doesn't Facebook just hire its own journalists? And it's an idea that Facebook has been sort of allergic to. But why not hire your own journalists who could make some of these decisions?
Emily, we have 2 billion people around the world using Facebook in order to connect with friends, family, and the things that they care about. What we're committed to doing is ensuring that when people come to Facebook, they have the experience that they expect, that it's authentic, that it's high quality, and that it's credible information. In order to best do that, we need a variety of tools. We need to remove fake accounts. In the first quarter of this year alone, we removed 583 million fake accounts who are often involved in seeding and spreading misinformation and other types of low-quality content. We also need to go after the financial incentives. Third, we need to reduce the spread of false or misleading content by showing those stories lower in newsfeed. And then fourth, we need to give people more information. Across the board, we need to use both technology and human review. But the problem isn't so much about the individuals who are providing or weighing in on some of this content. It's really how we can scale this effort in order to go after the full breadth of this challenge and fight it most effectively around the world.
And once a piece of news or fake news is flagged, fact-checked, put out, what do you do to make sure it doesn't get recycled in other ways and appear elsewhere?
It's a great question. So to use one example, if we have an article that has been rated as false by one of the fact checkers that we partner with, we reduce the spread of that individual article in newsfeed. But we also use machine learning in order to identify duplicates of those articles or ways in which that same content might be reappearing from other domains or from other pages. Because we know that in many cases, the bad actors behind this content aren't just sharing one example of it, they're trying to create duplicates in order to further achieve their financial incentives or whatever their objectives might be. And I think what's really important about this point is that we have to recognize that the fight against fake news is an adversarial fight, that there are people who are highly motivated, whether those motivations are financial or otherwise, to continue to spread this type of information and to profit from it in whatever way that might be. So we need to ensure that our systems are staying ahead of their adaptations and anticipating the next wave of this fight.
So on that note, obviously, Russia's efforts to undermine American democracy using Facebook are continuing. Is it actually possible to stop this problem, to stop disinformation on Facebook? Or is it a losing battle?
It's possible, absolutely, for us to do a much better job of ensuring that the information that people see on Facebook is authentic and high quality. Now, the broader conversation around misleading information is something that's been around long before social media and will continue to be a challenge. So we need to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to give people information so that they can also make informed decisions, which is why one of the things that we're sharing today is a broader effort that we have to help people identify potentially false or misleading information by giving them tips for trends that they can spot. And this is part of a broader effort we have to be more transparent with people about the information that they're seeing on Facebook, the people behind that information, and the steps that they can take to control the information that they see in their own personal newsfeed.
That was Tessa Lyons, a Facebook newsfeed product manager. Coming up, in the world of esports, Fortnite is anticipated to gain even more popularity this year. We're going to talk to the Allied Esports CEO about how they'll tap in to the massive market. This is Bloomberg. Sony is set to solidify its position as the largest music publisher in the world when it buys EMI Music Publishing for about $2 billion. This will come in the form of a 60% equity stake, something new CEO Kenichiro Yoshida will set Sony up for years to come.
This move is a way to intensify our content and IP business. Sony and EMI combined own the copyrights to 4.4 million songs. With this deal, Sony becomes one of the largest music publishers in the world. We expect steady income from music publishing, and it will be a key growth area in the long term.
Meantime, esports continue to gain traction around the world, and one company wants in on the action. Epic Games, the company behind the hit game Fortnite, has announced $100 million in prize pool money for Fortnite competitions in the first year of competitive play. Not much detail has come out about what these tournaments may look like, but if last month's tournament in Vegas with Fortnite mega streamer Ninja is a preview of what is to come, this could be a serious game changer. The event in April was held at the newly opened esports arena in the Luxor Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Allied Esports is the company behind this space and other arenas around the world that allow gamers to meet up and compete in the hottest new video tournaments in what could become a $1.5 billion industry by 2020. That's according to Newzoo. We spoke with Allied Esports CEO Judd Hannigan.
Fortnite has really taken the world by storm. It's truly grabbed gamers everywhere, and it really speaks to the volume and the excitement around the battle royale genre of gaming, which has been around a while but has really picked up steam. But as of March of this year, research firm SuperData reported that about 40 million players worldwide and $223 million in revenue in the month of March alone for Epic Games and what is this phenomenal growth in Fortnite.
So how do you imagine these competitions actually working? Is it every person for themselves? Is it teams? Will they be happening in your arenas?
Absolutely. I think the beauty of this genre is there's a 1v1 format, there's a 2v2 format, and then there's a 4v4 format as well, with a lot of creativity and other formats I'm sure coming on the back of this. Even 50v50 it can happen in these games. The interesting thing about a Battle Royale format is usually there's about 100 players that drop into a map, and you're scrambling for weapons, and it's a last man standing type of game. So there's really no limit to the creativity that can happen inside these games. And so what's coming from Epic and other creative tournament organizers like ourselves will be truly exciting for the industry as a whole.
So talk to us a little bit about how you see these fitting into your arenas and your realm.
Sure. I mean, for Allied, we have 6 arenas around the world to date in North America, Europe, and China. Our flagship opened up in March in Las Vegas, and one of the things that we really looked at was the rise of Fortnite and how truly powerful and popular this game was, and how do we bring that excitement into a building. And so what we did was we partnered up with the most popular influencer and streamer in that game, a guy named Tyler Ninja Blevins, and brought him in, where he's typically streaming from his home to millions of viewers every day. We brought him into Las Vegas, headlining on the Las Vegas Strip, and basically created an environment where players in the arena could play with him. Really an enhanced experience overall.
You know, there's talk about how Fortnite is a more potentially inclusive game, but do you think that could help or hurt esports, given the traditional sort of first-person shooter audience?
Well, esports really covers a wide variety of games. There's multiplayer online battle arenas, which are team-based. There's first-person shooters, which can be team-based. There's team-based shooters. There's a lot of different genres out there today. And Battle Royale is just another example of that. It just happens to be the one that's growing the fastest right now, largely on the back of games like Fortnite and others that have really seen a rise, and the inclusiveness to it, the ability to play in different formats within the same framework of a game is exciting. And you can see that by the interest in people watching and tuning in, but also the amount of players is just phenomenal.
So, you know, when talking about hit games, there's always this question, is it a flash in the pan, or is this going to be a franchise that is going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars year after year after year? Is it too early to say that Fortnite is going to be a lasting hit? I just think about Pokemon Go, for example, which really was a moment and not a movement.
Well, I think that you're right. It's early. One of the things that's amazing about this industry is the games keep changing. New games keep coming. And while not many people had heard about Fortnite 6 or 7 months ago, it is the hottest game today. And this industry has that power for a newcomer to come along and for more growth and more users and more players. And that's one of the things that's exciting.
Welcome back to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. In the wake of Brexit and President Trump's complicated relationship with Silicon Valley, tech firms are expanding their presence in Paris. Google and Facebook, for example, are making large investments in France and luring tech talent to the region. On Monday, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde previewed what was a big week for Paris in tech this week.
French President Emmanuel Macron is looking to become the go-to head of state for global tech. This week, he's hosting the heads of Google, Microsoft, Uber, and other notable firms at the presidential palace. The meetings will be followed by the Viva Technology Summit. This could signal a big shift for the country. For years, the French tech scene has operated in the shadow of the rest of the world, but Macron's capitalizing on a void left by President Trump's, well, complicated relationship with global tech. France has had only 3 startups achieve unicorn status, compared to 22 in the UK and 105 in the US. But recently, Paris's tech industry is reinventing itself. There were a record 743 tech deals in 2017, growing by almost 45% from 2016. And the total value of the deals also jumped nearly 50% from last year. Meanwhile, the country is hoping to jumpstart innovation and investment with its biggest bet to date, Station F in Paris's 13 arrondissement. It's the world's largest startup incubator. The 366,000 square foot property opened up last summer with 8 event spaces, 4 kitchens, and 1 coffee shop and a pop-up space. However, it will cost you. Firms like Accel Partners and Index Ventures pay $6,100 a year membership fee. So, has it been a success? It remains to be seen. But Station F is continuing to expand the programs it offers and the campus. It will soon open 100 shared apartments.
And Caroline was on the ground in Paris all week, reporting live from Bloomberg's Sooner Than You Think event, as well as Viva Tech. She spoke with several influencers, including Maurice Levy, chair of the supervisory board at advertising giant Publicis Group, on Tuesday.
The tech world is now meeting in Paris, and we will start tomorrow with a very important meeting with President Macron about tech for good, how technology can help people to have a better life. And from Thursday to Saturday, we will have the tech world meeting in Paris. We are expecting to get Mark Zuckerberg, Satya Nadella, Ginny Rometty, 6,000 startups, more than 2,000 investors, etc., etc. So it's something which will be extremely important, and it shows that France is committed to be ready for technology, for startups, for entrepreneurship. And this is something which is rather new. It's very fresh, only 3 years. Yeah. And we expect all the planet to have their eyes looking at Paris.
What policies has President Macron brought in to make it a better place to build your startup and to invest as a technology company?
I think the first thing that he did is a state of mind, to change the opinion that including the French could have about entrepreneurship and being successful. In France, it was not so good to be successful. Success was not celebrated, to say the least. And sometimes people were blamed because they were successful and making some wealth. Today, it is interesting to see that President Macron and the government as a whole are encouraging the young people to start up their own business and encouraging the venture capitalists to invest in France and to support startups.
Mr. Macron, President Macron will meet, as you say, with some of 40 technology leaders, including Mark Zuckerberg, Dara Khosrowshahi of Uber. He wants to remind them of their responsibility. Is technology taking its responsibility seriously enough at the moment? What changes need to be made?
The reason why he is organizing the meeting tomorrow with roughly 70 CEOs, some very important names that you have already mentioned, and a few important names in France, the main reason is to see what the future will be and how technology, which is creating some fears. You have a lot of people who are fearing about what artificial intelligence or technology can do to their job, the fact that they may not be able to succeed in the future or even to continue just to work. And there is 3 sessions which will be organized, 3 breakout sessions, one led by Ginny Rometty about education, what should be the education in the future. The second is by Dara regarding the future of work, how should we be organizing the work and the continuous training of the people in order that they are never left aside. And last but not least, about equality, gender and diversity. And this is extremely important, that this will be led by Bill McDermott from SAP.
That was Maurice Levy, chairman of the supervisory board at Publicis Group, speaking with our very own Caroline Hyde. Now, a story we are watching. Google could face a $4.3 billion in damages in a British lawsuit involving iPhone users. This according to a company court filing. iPhone users sued Google, claiming it unlawfully collected personal data by bypassing the iPhone's default privacy settings. Google denies the claims. And sticking with Google, still ahead, the company was hit hard on 60 Minutes last weekend. Charges of Google's illegal search tactics getting the primetime TV treatment. How the U.S. government is now responding to the so-called monopoly next. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching. Intel has disclosed it found another way to attack computers related to the chip security flaws announced earlier this year. The company also said there is no evidence of it having been used to hack computers, and a fix is already in place. Google is getting a lot of heat after a 60 Minutes segment devoted to claims the search engine wields a destructive monopoly in online search and search advertising. The CBS segment highlighted how critics and rivals like Yelp have had enough of the company's dominance. Here's part of the discussion with Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman.
Ultimately, that manifested itself in you expecting that the top links, the things that it shows at the top of that page, are the best from around the web, the best that the world has to offer. And I can tell you that is not the case. That is not the case anymore.
Since the program aired last weekend, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin urged the Justice Department to review the power that large tech companies like Google have over the U.S. economy, taking a page right out of the EU playbook. On Monday, we spoke with Gary Reback, antitrust lawyer at Carr & Farrell, who was featured in Sunday night's episode of 60 Minutes and pursued antitrust cases against Google and Microsoft. Brian White, analyst at Monness Crespi Hart, who currently has a buy rating on the company, also joined us for this conversation.
The basic argument is that they have no real rivals in general search, and they are using their power in general search to manipulate search results in ways that disadvantage competitors and limit consumers' choices.
Brian, fair?
Well, I think, they definitely have a very high market share, so about 90% of the U.S. search market. I think as big companies get bigger and bigger, it's tougher to come by growth. And sometimes big companies engage in tactics that maybe they shouldn't. So, I watched the program. I thought it was a great program. I thought great points were made. I don't think there was a smoking gun, but, I think it provides ample information for people to look into it a little more.
So Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman said on 60 Minutes that he couldn't have started Yelp if Google operated the way it operates today and talked about the threat to his business. He also said this about just how links are displayed and how that affects you as a perhaps smaller business. Take a listen.
It's not even just the first page. It's the first few links on the page is the vast majority of where user attention goes and where the traffic flows.
So if you're not at the top of the page or the bottom of the first page or on the second page, that's going to affect your business.
Yeah, if you're on the second page, forget it. You're not a real business.
Now, here's what Google told 60 Minutes. The company denied it was a monopoly in search or search advertising, citing competitors like Amazon and Facebook. It says it does not make changes to its algorithm to disadvantage competitors, and that our responsibility is to deliver the best results possible to our users, not specific placements for sites within our results. We understand that those sites whose ranking falls will be unhappy and may complain publicly. Gary, what about the argument that some of these sites may just not like how they're displayed in Google, which may be directly correlated to the strength of their business and what they have to offer?
That argument is totally bogus, and you don't have to take my word for it. If you look at the Federal Trade Commission report that 60 Minutes cited, that's been up on the Wall Street Journal website for 2 years now, you'll see in the footnotes that the FTC got Google's internal emails, and they showed that Google specifically made a list of competitors to target with the goal of bringing those competitors down 20% in their search traffic hits, and they changed their algorithm repeatedly to get that result. And then they reported back to their superiors that they had, in fact, achieved their result. So I don't understand how these Google people with a straight face can go on saying what they're saying. It is directly belied by the FTC report.
You say that the government isn't enforcing the laws that we have. Do you also believe we need new laws or lawmakers who better understand the power of technology?
Well, we could certainly use more lawmakers who might get interested in this sector and understand how it affects their constituents. But I don't think we need to go off on the long rigmarole of trying to pass new legislation. We have legislation that worked fine against Microsoft. It just has to be enforced. The problem right now is it's not being enforced, or at least it wasn't in the Obama administration. It needs to be enforced now. If that doesn't work, we can try something else, but I think that will work. It worked against Microsoft.
Now, Brian, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin was asked about this report. He didn't call out Google specifically, but said that, tech companies in general, the DOJ needs to take a closer look. Does that concern you for Alphabet shareholders?
Well, it doesn't. I think when you look at Google and you look at all the businesses that they're in, if something ever came down antitrust-wise and say they had to break up the company, it would probably be worth a lot more. Right? I mean, they're number one in the smartphone operating system market by sure. They've got a great Waymo driverless car. They're number one in search. There's a lot of different YouTube, 1.8 billion monthly subs. They've got a lot of great businesses, under this umbrella. And so, sure, you should always look at any big company that's abusing their power. And so I think that's a given.
Interesting, Gary, that if Google was broken up, there's an argument to be made it could be worth a lot more, and that these companies separately could be even more powerful. How do you respond to that? I mean, and if Google is broken up, how should it be?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a good chance these individual constituent parts would be worth more. I mean, historically, we know that when Standard Oil was broken up, that's when John D. Rockefeller got most of his net worth. But the fact that they're worth more individually does not mean they're more powerful. You see, they can't conspire with each other as separate individual companies. In many cases, they would have to compete. At the very least, they would have to enter into contract negotiations, and other people would be able to compete against them more readily. So I agree with the other commentator. There is a good possibility they could be worth more to shareholders individually, and I think that's something that we ought to think about down the line. But the first step is to have a public trial so we understand what the remedy should be. We can't just jump to breaking them up. We don't know how to break them up exactly. We need a public trial so we understand what the issues are.
Now, interestingly, Facebook has been the company that's been in the regulatory spotlight over the last few weeks, though Google spends far more on lobbying in Washington than Facebook or Apple. We actually pulled the numbers on that. I'm curious, Gary, how do you think Google compares to Facebook when it comes to the idea of being a monopoly, given that Facebook also owns WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook Messenger? Is Google so much bigger an offender?
Well, I think that Google has been an offender longer. I try to be careful about my comments on companies, and I've spent a long time studying Google. 9 years. But I haven't gotten those kind of complaints yet about Facebook, so I want to be more circumspect in terms of what.
IBM has just announced it is hiring 1,400 employees in France over the next 2 years. The new positions will focus on AI, blockchain, and cybersecurity. Europe has become a draw for tech companies big and small. Deliveroo is one of Europe's biggest startups. Deliveroo CEO Will Shu spoke to Bloomberg during the Sooner Than You Think summit in Paris, and he talked about growth.
It was a great place to start a business. We're in 12 countries, Western Europe, Southern Europe, UAE, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. And the UK was a great place to start up a business. Able to convince people to work in a dark room without heating in the beginning. And people were willing to take a risk on that. We found it pretty straightforward to launch in other European countries as well. France is our second biggest market, and we've had a lot of success here recruiting a great team.
Your second biggest market is where we're stood now, and you're about to go meet the President of France, Macron. What will you be talking to him about?
I think that our interactions with the French government have been very positive. He has been pro-business, pro-growth, pro-investment, and just looking forward to hearing from him.
A lot of it is about tech for good. How do you ensure that Deliveroo is scaling with the ethics that you want?
Yeah, look, we today announced a free insurance product for all of our riders around the world, which covers them in the event of injury, also protects them, protects their income in the event of injury as well. So we're doing a lot of things along that front.
Regulation has obviously been focused upon the driver and on the flexibility meeting protection. Is that a square you can circle to a certain extent? You're helping by giving them insurance,
Definitely.
But do they need more in terms of pay and ensuring they get the minimum wage?
So the number one reason why Deliveroo riders work with us overwhelmingly is flexibility. So the ability to log in and out, the ability to work whenever you want. And at the same time, I personally believe we need to offer benefits as well. There has been this sort of impasse between flexibility and benefits, and so we want to work with governments, including the French government, to end this.
What about scaling as you continue to? You're going into new ventures, new ideas, you're helping fund new concepts at restaurants. What are some of the new innovations you're coming up with to stay ahead of the competition, such as Uber Eats? And you're going to be sat next to Dara Khosrowshahi potentially at today's meeting.
Yeah, look, for us, we're all about food. So it's about going deeper and deeper into the food chain. So we've created hundreds of delivery-only kitchens to help our restaurant partners expand. We're helping our restaurants build virtual brands that only exist on Deliveroo. We're helping funding new concepts as well. And this is just the beginning. So we're really excited about that.
Our Caroline Hyde there also spoke with Atomico CEO Nicholas Zennstrom from Bloomberg Sooner Than You Think event in Paris and asked what he expects to come out of President Macron's meetings with tech leaders.
I think it's great that President Macron is engaging with technology to start with, because we all need that, but also to addressing the aspect that technology can have positive impact, and also, of course, that it can have negative impacts that we need to deal with as well.
Talk to us about the ramifications and the responsibilities of technology, because Mark Zuckerberg is going to be at this particular event, and he's a man who's had to deal with a lot of the repercussions of getting too big too quick, potentially.
Yeah, sure. So if you take a bit of a historical perspective, technology, since it started with the Industrial Revolution, has created a lot of growth and economical growth and prosperity. It also has had a lot of negative impacts, environment, and so forth. And my belief is that the new generation of technology, so the digital technology and high tech, has a lot of positive impacts in terms of climate change, water, and so forth. However, it's also now this technology is starting to have some unplanned consequences as well that we all need to deal with, whether that is privacy, whether that is algorithms that has biases, and these are things that everyone else in the technology world have to take responsibility for this now.
So when you're funding new startups, as you do with Atomico, how are you having those conversations with founders to ensure that the culture and the ethics grow in the right way?
Yeah. It's really interesting to see that younger founders are starting their companies. Of course, they're watching what's happening, and they're sponges, and they're seeing, okay, what can we learn from the previous generation of entrepreneurs? So they want to build these things into their companies from the day one. So when we're investing in them, we're coming in with talking to them about governance, but we're also asking them the questions about diversity, about ethics, and this is something that all of them are responding very well to. So I think there's an opportunity to work with the next generation of founders to build in some kind of code of conduct from the day one.
What about the next generation competition of European founders versus American founders. Is this a coming of age? We've just seen Spotify list for 20 billion. You've got money. You've got iZettle being bought by PayPal. You've got money coming back into the ecosystem. Are we at a turning point?
Yeah. So I would say it's an inflection point. It's not a turning point. It's an inflection point. We have been at a steady growth since the years after 2000, and when we had the Skype exit in 2005, that was a big thing. But now this IPO of Spotify is 10x, and along the way we had $60 billion companies in the last 10 years. You had 14 $5 billion companies. You had a few 10 or $25 billion companies, Spotify, Arm. So the scale is getting bigger and bigger. So there is no doubt in my mind that Europe is now at that inflection point of continuous growth.
We've had different types of exits. iZettle was meant to be coming to the market to list, and suddenly it gets swooped up and snapped up by PayPal. Meanwhile, Spotify did indeed list. Do you wish you'd listed Skype? Was it a possibility?
So the first time, when we started Skype in 2002, we said we're going to build a company for a really long term. If this company is going to be around and be a meaningful player in 15 years, we're going to be happy. So 15 years down the road, it's still around and is doing fine. So that's what we're happy with. So we never had an intention to sell, but you also have to look at what are the alternatives. Back then, there was really no prospect of listing.